which is providing access to data and formats. So what we've done so far, we set up our users and groups so that we have the correct users and groups in the system. Now we've got folders available for users to put reports or anything else they want to build in there. And we have, what's the next thing we need? We need to provide data so that they can build reports. So we have somewhere to store our content. We're going to build our reports off of data. We have to make data available. So in this section, we're going to look at what a CAS lib is. So defining CAS libs to access data. We're going to look at creating scheduled jobs to load and refresh data. And we'll look at making sure any user-defined formats that you need are available in the CAS server. Who knows what a CAS lib is? So we have one person who knows what a CAS lib is. Come on up. So you'll get a lot more about CAS libs when Uttam and MK are up doing the data management stuff. But we kind of need to give you an idea of what they are because they're very important to Viya and CAS. That's how we get our data. So we introduce it here and you'll get more detail later. A CAS lib is basically a container that holds your data. It's kind of like a library, but it's a little bit different. In the container, there's really two spaces for data. When you want to do any analysis of data or use data in CAS, you have to have a CAS lib, and the data has to be in memory. So the first space for data is the in-memory space, and that's where your reports and any data plans or anything else you do with your data, any analysis, that's where it goes to get the data in memory. But the CAS lib also has another space, which is the source. In this case, I'm looking at a path-based CAS lib, and the source for a path-based CAS lib will be a directory on the file system and the files that are in that directory. So the CAS lib has the in-memory space and it has the source, and you load the data into memory from the source most times. There are some exceptions to that, but I won't go into them. So two areas for the data, in-memory and the source data. In this case, my path-based CAS lib, I have 4 files in the source, so 4 files in the directory, and 2 of them have been loaded into memory. So these are the files in memory that my reports will hit, and these files are available for lifting into memory if I need them. So that's what a CAS lib is. What the CAS lib also contains is the connection information to the data, so where the source is basically. In our case, if it's a path-based CAS lib, that's just a path on the file system. So the connection is, in this case, in the example, /op/data. But we have a whole other different sets of CAS libs that we'll go into in detail in the data management section. Database CAS libs, Hadoop CAS libs. In that case, the connection information, for example, if it's Postgres, which we will do a little bit of administration of a Postgres CAS lib in class, it's basically the connection to the database, which would give it the source tables. And then the other things the CAS lib contains is metadata about the permissions for the CAS lib, so the users and groups that can access it and the access controls that are applied to the CAS lib. Okay? In terms of administration of defining CAS libs and loading data to them, we have some choices. In Viya 3.4, there is a common data window that you will see in SAS Environment Manager. You'll see it in SAS Visual Analytics. You'll see it in SAS Data Studio. It's the same window that comes up that allows you to define CAS libs and load data into memory from the CAS libs. I'm not going to show you the common data window, how to do that. That will be done when MK is up here doing the data administration part. The other ways to do it are we can do it via the programming interfaces, so procCAS or Python or Java or Lua. And then we also have a command line interface, the CAS plugin to the SAS admin command line interface, which will allow you to define a CAS lib and load data into memory, and the Viya and the CAS REST APIs. You could also do it there. In the admin section, we're going to focus on the third bullet, the SAS admin CAS plugin. That's how we're going to do it, because you're going to see how to do it the other way later on in class. And CAS libs have this concept of global and non-global CAS libs, session-based CAS libs. A global CAS lib, and when we're talking about the visual interfaces, all CAS libs are really global. A global CAS lib is a CAS lib that's available to all the users in the environment subject to permissions. And a session-based CAS lib, that's another thing you'll hear, it's only available to the session that it was created in. So that's more like something you would get in SAS Studio when you define a CAS lib and it's just you that's using it. It's not shared with a bunch of other users. And I mentioned global and session-based CAS libs because to manage global CAS libs, you need to have specific permissions within SAS Environment Manager. You need to have the CAS lib management privileges. So looking at the ways to add a CAS lib and load data. The first way we have here is using proc-cas. The same similar syntax we could have in Java, in Lua, in Python, using the actions and action sets. The first step, we add a CAS lib. We give it the information about the CAS lib. We're saying it's a source. It's a path-based CAS lib. We give it a name. We tell it where the path is. We say session equals false, meaning it's a global CAS lib, and we want it to be the active CAS lib. So that defines a CAS lib to the path/data. And then the next step, after we define the CAS lib, we want to load data into memory. The table.load table for our new CAS lib says load the file salesmaster.sas7b.dat. So load a SAS dataset into memory. So that's how you would do it with proc-cas. And then the second set of syntax there is how to do it via the command line interface. So we create a path-based CAS lib in the first step, point it to the path, and then in the second step, we load that same table from the path-based CAS lib into memory. So that takes salesmaster, which is in the source of the CAS lib, and lifts it into memory so that it's in memory for anyone within Visual Analytics or Data Studio to use it. In terms of persistence, global CAS libs definitions are stored in a file called the perm store, which is inside the CAS configuration directory on the CAS controller machine. So it's a little file that whenever you define a CAS lib, it stores the definition of it in there. And what that means is it's like metadata about the CAS lib. What that means is that whenever the CAS server is restarted, the definitions of the global CAS libs are always available. So it's not like they'll disappear. They are saved in that file on the file system. And if CAS is restarted, you go into Environment Manager, you're going to see the definition of all your CAS libs still there. You don't lose anything. Data. The data for the CAS lib is a little different, right? Just like in Laser, when we had in-memory data, right? What happened in a Laser server to the in-memory data if you restarted the Laser server? It was gone, right? Well, CAS is the same. If you restart a CAS server, the data is dropped out of memory, right? It's not persisted. But, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the CAS lib definition is there, so you still have the definition of the CAS lib. So if you restart a CAS server, the data drops out of memory. How do you make sure that data is available to people who need to use it after a server restart? Well, there's a number of options in Viya. The first one we'll mention again in the CAS authorization section. If you set permissions correctly on the CAS lib, CAS will do this on-demand loading where if it goes to a report looking for the data for a report and that data is not in memory, it will just automatically lift that data into memory from the CAS lib source into memory, first time it's needed, and then the data will be available for the report. So just everything happens automatically behind the scenes. Really nice, right? Because in Laser, what happened when the data was out of memory in VA 7.3 or 7.4? You just got an error message, right? So that's pretty cool. We're not going to look at that in this section. It's covered in CAS authorization. The other thing you can do is, yep, question?
If it's going to max out memory, will it just fill up? Or is there a prioritization for anything? Or?
So if you, yeah, if it's, well, that gets into the CAS disk cache, which is a whole other topic. It will do spilling over to disk. It does a lot of that stuff, which is covered in the architecture section. But truly, if you run out of resources completely, if it's going to run out of resources completely, it will just fall over eventually. But CAS is much better at managing memory than Laser was. It's definitely a big improvement. So the second way we can make sure the data is available is we can implement data loading on CAS server startup. CAS server startup, Scott will show you, has a set of files that you can put some code in and do anything you can do with a CAS action in those files. And one of the things you might want to do is load data into memory when the CAS server starts. So that's covered in the server administration section that's coming this afternoon. And then the third way is we can set up jobs and scheduling so that data is loaded and unloaded and refreshed at periodic intervals. And that's what we're going to look at in the slides that are coming up right now. Jobs and scheduling. Still got 3.3 on this slide, so we'll fix that. But 4 types of jobs could be created in 3.3. The one we're going to look at is CAS table state management jobs. They can be used to load, unload, and refresh data in a CAS lib. Data Explorer also has jobs that lets you load individual tables into memory. SAS Data Studio has jobs that can prepare and transform data. And Visual Analytics has jobs that allow you to schedule the distribution of reports. And then if you remember back to yesterday morning, Terry also described another set of jobs that are like stored processes in Viya 3.4, so that's another set of jobs that we have. In this section, we're going to look at this specific type of job, the CAS table state management jobs. So using these jobs, an administrator can manage the import, load, and unload of data in CAS. Kind of like autoload was in SAS 9.4, right? This is our new version of autoload that lets us periodically refresh or load data in memory. So the way it works is we get 3 sample jobs, a load, an unload, and an import job. The load job will load from a source of a CAS lib into memory. So the diagram I showed you right at the start of this section had the source and the in-memory space of the CAS lib, and we had 4 tables. I could set up a load job that every hour, or whatever schedule I pick, is going to take the source of that CAS lib and refresh the data into memory. It would also pick up any other tables I dropped into that CAS lib source. So if I could drop a CSV file in here at 12:30, at 1 o'clock, with my load job, that CSV file would be loaded into memory. So very like autoload was in SAS 9.4. Then there's an import job. The import job will take data from another location and import it into the source of a CAS lib. So that would be a way you could have maybe a drop zone where you drop files and you set up an import job that imports the jobs from here and puts them into the source of a CAS lib. And then maybe after that, you have a load job that loads from the source into memory. So that's the way the import job works. It puts data into the source of a CAS lib. And then the unload job will unload the tables in the target CAS lib based on recent access or some kind of query. So with that, you can say, if you have a big table that's taken up a lot of memory, you can set up a query to say, if this table's not been accessed in some time period, say the last 6 hours or something like that, drop that table out of memory to save resources. So a way to manage the usage of your memory on your system based on how often a table's been accessed. So this is an example of a load job. Basically, there's 2 parts to it. There's the schedule configuration. Scheduling's fairly basic right now. It's really just time-based triggers. So you can schedule based on a time and a period. There's no sort of other ways to trigger a job to run. And then you have the actual configuration of the job. So in this load job, we point to a CAS lib with 2 tables in it. It will load those 2 tables into memory. You can filter the types of tables you want to load. So you could say, For this CAS lib, I only want to load CSVs, so just load CSV files or just load SAS HDAT files. You can tell it whether to refresh the data in memory or just reload it completely. And then new in 3.4, you have this thing called the success job ID. That allows you to chain jobs. That allows you to do one job, and if the job finishes successfully, kick off another job. So for the first time, we could have 3 or 4 of these jobs in a row. It's not, you don't get a GUI to join them together or anything. You just have to enter that job ID at the end of one job. At the beginning of another job, enter the job ID of the previous job. If that job runs successfully, then the new job will run. The additional job will run. So that's new in 3.4. Quite nice. In order to create a job, there's no way to create a new job just by saying right-clicking and saying new job. Basically what you have to do is copy the 3 existing jobs. So you have a load job, an unload job, and an import job. To create a new job, you copy one of those jobs and then you edit the parameters of it. That's the way you create a new job. Once you edit the arguments, you save it, and then you can run it on demand, and you can also schedule it to run on a periodic basis. And then within the job tab, there's also a monitoring tab, and that allows you to monitor the state of the scheduled jobs. So you can see if a job's running. If the job's finished, you can see the status of the job. You can click on the job and you can see a log based on what's happened and get an idea of if your job's been successful, what it did. If it's not been successful, what were the reasons for it not being successful. So the next hands-on, we're still in the same document. We're going to do 3.1 through 3.4. What we'll do is we'll add a path-based CAS lib. I think we add 2 of them actually. We'll load data to the CAS lib, so that will be loading data from the source of the CAS lib into memory. Then we'll define a database-based CAS lib to a Postgres database. And then finally, you're going to create a job that will refresh the data from the CAS lib on a periodic basis. Any questions before you start? All right. 3.1 through 3.4. Okay, so we added a path-based CAS lib. We added 2 of them. We loaded data to them. We added a Postgres CAS lib, right? And we used the domain that we defined in an earlier section, right? In the identity management section. And we automated the refresh of the data to the CAS lib. So now we have data in memory, ready for the next section. Questions? So before we set security on our data, we're going to look at user-defined formats. You might have data that you're loading to CAS that has user-defined formats, right? Everyone's familiar with SAS formats in base SAS, right? Been around for a long time. So if a CAS table, if you're loading a table into CAS and it has user-defined formats applied to it, you have to make the formats available to the CAS server. The issue is that formats in SAS 9.4 are stored in SAS catalogs, right? But CAS can't read catalogs, so we have to convert the formats to a format that CAS can read, and that's the SAS HDAT format. And then you have to also make sure that that SAS HDAT file is globally shared among all the users in the CAS environment so that they can access the format. So that's what we'll do in this section. The standard CAS configuration sets up a global path-based CAS library. So this is a CAS lib, just like the ones we've been talking about. It points to this location inside the configuration directory. So on the CAS server under CAS default formats, within that location there is one CAS format library, and it's called SAS supplied formats, and that holds the formats that Environment Manager uses. So basically the formats that Viya and the system needs to do what it does. And that format library is made available because it's defined in a file called casstartup.lua. The that is executed when the CAS server starts. And that's the way the user-defined formats that Viya uses, that our environment needs, are defined to the system. Something to be aware of here is, I mentioned a cast library, right? And then I mentioned a format library. So the use of the term library is kind of overloaded here. The cast library is just like the cast libraries we've been talking about. That's a container. The cast format library, it's unfortunate that it's named library 2. The cast format library, you can think of that as, if you're familiar with SAS 9.4, as the catalog. That's the file that contains the formats that you're making available to the system. So if you want to compare it to 9.4, the cast lib is the library. And in 9.4, we had a library and our formats were in catalogs inside the library. In Viya, there's a cast lib, and then our formats are in a cast format library within the cast library. And the format library is in SAS HDAT format. It's a type of SAS HDAT file. Okay? In terms of format administration, I mentioned earlier that there are two sort of levels of administration, right? You can be a Viya administrator, but to do administration on CAS, you need to be a Viya administrator and a CAS administrator. For format administration, if you're a Viya administrator, you can administer formats in existing format libraries. So you can import formats to a format library that already exists. You can create new formats in a format library that already exists. You can copy and delete formats in a format library that already exists. If you want to do something with the format library, so administer the actual format libraries, you need to go to the next level. So you need to become a CAS administrator, become a super user on the CAS server. And if you do that, you can create a format library. You can optionally populate it from an item store, a catalog, or a SAS HDAT file when you create it, so you can put formats in it. You can delete a format library, and you can update the format search path. So CAS has a similar concept to SAS 9.4, where it has a search path for the formats, and you specify the format libraries that are in the search path and the order they're in, and CAS is going to look for, say you have two gender formats. One's in format library 1 and one's in format library 5. When it does the search, it will find the one in format library 1 first. It's the same concept we had in SAS 9.4 with catalogs and the format search path. So all of these steps you can perform now in SAS Environment Manager in 3.4 and can also be accomplished with code and with the CLI. So you can see a pattern in all the materials. We can do a lot of the stuff in Environment Manager. We can also do it in code. We can also do it in the CLIs. So to make user-defined formats available, step 1 is update the format search path. So you can add a CAS format library and update the search path so that CAS can find the formats. And to do that, as I mentioned, you have to be a CAS administrator to accomplish that step. You can do it via code, the CLI, and Environment Manager. So as a CAS administrator, if I add a format CAS library, make it available, then I can give access to another lower level administrator, a Viya administrator, who could then be the person who adds formats to the format library and maybe adds this format or that format that the user needs on their data. So step 2 would be, once you have the format library, to load formats to the format library. You can do that via code, you can do that via the CLI, and then you can now do that in SAS Environment Manager. You can import formats from a SAS HDAT file, an item store, which is a special format that you needed in 3.3 to import to, but really nice in 3.4, we can now import directly from a SAS catalog. So you can point the user interface to an existing format catalog and import the formats into a format CAS library. So the item store was something that we needed to convert a catalog to an item store to do it in 3.3. 3.4, they've added the feature of you don't have to do that. You can go straight to the catalog and import from the catalog. So if you are a CAS administrator, you're a Viya administrator and a CAS administrator, you can do it all in one step. So that's a screenshot of Environment Manager where I have creating a new format library. I call it HRFMT. I give it a path to a SAS catalog, saying I want to import that SAS catalog, and then the last set of options is what you want to do with the search order. Do you want to append to it? Do you want to prepend to it? Do you want to do nothing to the format search order? So, name of the format library you want to import to, point it to the catalog, the path of the file to import. Basically, whatever you put in here, the extension of the file is going to determine how it does the import. So if you put SAS7bcat, it's going to expect a catalog. If you put SAS HDAT, it's going to expect an HDAT file in there. It's going to trigger a different kind of import. One thing I want to mention is one of the options under search order is replace. That's a very dangerous option to put here. If I put prepend, it's just going to put this format library at the start of the existing search path. That's fine. It's just going to change the search path. If I put append, it's going to put this format library at the end of the search path. One of the choices here is replace. If you put replace, it's going to replace the existing search path with just that format library. So you're going to blow away the search path and just put that format library in there. So I just want to make a note of that because it's kind of dangerous. Documentation calls it out too, so it is mentioned in the documentation that replace can be dangerous. You've probably noticed already that the CLIs are pretty powerful. In the format area, the CLI was updated for 3.4. In 3.3, you could only really list the format search path and list formats. In the command line interface for formats now, you can do all the things that you can do via the interface. So this example here creates a format cast lib, gives it a name, updates the search order, tells it where to import the formats from. So all in one step. In your materials, you have a SAS program in the supplemental section that's probably about 50 lines long or 40 lines long. This one line, if you string it out, replace that SAS program. That was the way we had to do it in code in 3.2 and 3.3. So the CLI has really made this a lot easier. All right, having said all that about the UI and about the CLI and how easy it is now to import formats and make them available, there's a kind of a large caveat to this in 3.4. If the CAS server restarts, all those changes that you made via the UI or the CLI pretty much go away. The only way to persist this over a server restart is actually to implement the update of the format search path and then making the format libraries available in the CAS server startup.lua files. So there's a disconnect between how the CAS server does it on a restart and the UI. The UI has no way to, doesn't update these files for you. It just makes the change for the existing CAS server. So if you want it to persist across the restart, you have to make the changes as CAS startup.lua, and we will do that this afternoon as one of the hands-on this afternoon, so you'll see how to do that.